Hello, wonderful people. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel, whatever the case may be. Today, I am starting something new and different. I've mentioned it in a couple of my videos recently. I have reached out to a couple of writers that I have done work for in the past, asking if they'd be okay with me reading their books on my channel. And one in particular has responded back and said, yeah, he'd be fine with that. And he actually has, I'm on his, I'm in his newsletter. I receive his newsletter. He stopped writing a few years ago due to the COVID-19, and he just recently started writing again. And so yeah, he shared chapter 1 of his newest book, and it is called The Dragonox Saga, Kingdom of Thoyatsu. And he says, this is my longest novel and series yet. He's hoping to have it published before summer starts, if not at the end of March. Chapter 1, The Oakwoods Mine. Cadius Balered's eyes shot open as the faint flicker of torchlight danced across the cramped interior of his large drawing room. His gray irises flared like storm clouds nestled beneath the sunken sockets of his weathered face. The wavering glow caught the surface of his silver-domed head, a seamless curve etched with faint Antron runes that shimmered briefly before fading away once more. Cadius lifted a gnarled, calloused hand and ran it over the dome, feeling the sweat that slicked the metal, a warm, clammy sensation intensified by the sulphurous night in Braden Village that pressed against the cracked stone walls of his home, much like a miner's unrelenting grudge. Something had snapped his metasis spell. Or metasis. Yeah, metasis. I'm going to go with metasis. Metasis spell. A sacred trance he had painstakingly woven with Antrons over hours. Over hours earlier that evening, forming a lattice of pulling energy to shield Braden's vulnerable edges from the creeping tendrils of Secundus. Now that lattice lay shattered, broken apart as if a clumsy pick had struck a vitrium vein with too much force, and the sudden jolt screamed of trouble, deep, gnawing trouble that set his heart pounding beneath the folds of his black robe. The robe's hem, threaded with shimmering vitrium strands, caught the hearth's dying glow and cast jagged shadows across the clay-patched floor, molten silver glints that flickered like a miner's fleeting hope in a spent shaft. "What have those miners done now?" he growled, and his voice emerged as a gravelly rasp that echoed off the porous walls, which were thick with the tang of damp earth and pierced by the acrid bite of sulphur seeping through the cracks like a festering wound in Clume's flesh. Did they crack a thanite seam and wake the veil itself? Or have they been pilfering vitrium to line some traitor's purse? Ooh, already sounds really good. Hopefully you think too. Okay. He lurched from the narrow cot where he had been resting, and its straw ticking crackled sharply under the shift of his lean frame, a sound that mingled with the thud of his boots against the floor, a force strong enough to send a small puff of ash swirling up from the seams. The stale scent of the ash blended with the faint smoke trailing from the hearth, where embers glowed a dull red in their final gasps. I can sense a surge in Neptons, he murmured to himself, addressing the flickering shadows that danced across the walls, and his hawkish face, with sharp cheekbones jutting beneath sunken eyes, and a jagged scar slicing from brow to jaw like a miner's tally of hard years, and became etched with a deepening suspicion. Antron's hold Clume steady and bind its bones tight, but Neptons will tear it apart if you don't leash them right. Those fools must be meddling again where they shouldn't, and I'd wager Zarathan's dogs are behind this, stirring the knocks and siphoning vitrium for their cursed hoard. There wasn't much time, he thought to himself, and his jaw clenched tight with a tension that pulled at the scarred skin of his lip, curling it into a grimace as he reached for his shimmering cloak. The cloak was the one thing free of soot and ash in the room, a hint at its magical properties. He snatched it from a rusted hook beside the hearth. As he did, the metal pulled away from the wall faintly under the tug, and the cloak's weight settled over his sinewy shoulders like a miner's yoke burdened with the day's haul. Their folly won't interfere with my charge, he vowed under his breath. Not while I draw breath, and not while the dome's will chains me to this wretched pit. Very, very descriptive, if you ask me. Yes, I have really enjoyed working on this writer's books. It's quite detailed. Yeah. Quite detailed. I haven't found any mistakes so far. Like spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes, punctuation. It's really good so far. Okay. Master Cadius, a timid voice piped up from the doorway, and it quivered like a leaf caught in the ceaseless wind that howled through Braden's barren streets. Veldrin, the greedy tax collector, stood there, a wiry runt with a pinched face, whose twitchy brown eyes darted like a cornered Nox seeking escape. He shuffled into the room, and his bald pate glistened with nervous sweat under a once stylish but now threadbare hood that sagged over his slumped shoulders. His tunic, a patchwork of faded silver stitched together with clumsy thread, hung loose on a frame so thin it seemed incapable of casting a proper shadow against the stone floor. "I thought I heard of some disturbance at the mine," he said, his voice rising to a high squeak that grated on Cadius's ears like a Nox's claw scraping across stone. "What do you think it could be? It's not them Nox again, chewing and thieving, is it? They wreak havoc on my ledgers, you know. Last week one nicked a vit right off my tally, and I had to chase it halfway to the well." Piece of trash. Cadius whirled around, and his gray gaze blazed with a fire that cut through the room's gloom. The torchlight seemed to light up his silver dome, turning it into a beacon that cast a stark reflection on the peeling murals of girt herds lining the walls. Faded ghosts of a richer past when Braden thrived, their colors long since bled away by the damp and neglect that now defined the village. "Your precious miners, Veldrin, have likely torn a rift with their digging," he snapped, striding toward the trembling tax collector, his cloak billowing behind him like a storm cloud rolling over Braden's desolate fields. "And now Neptons are flooding into the mine like a storm. Did I not instruct you and them to heed the Temple of the Dome's edicts, or are they too busy smuggling vitrium outside the kingdom in order to line some trader's pocket? Zarathan's stench clings to this mess, so mark my words. The miners are either fools or pawns. Well, that took forever. I think next time I'm going to pre-read this and then just play it while I'm working. Veldrin wrung his hands tightly, and his ring-filled fingers twisted together as if trying to squeeze out his mounting panic. His voice squeaked higher still, grating like a Nox's claw on stone. "They're simple folk, my lord, and digging's all they know. The Emperor's vits don't flow unless the mines do. Niall's coffers hunger for vitrium, and he'll have my hide flayed if the tally comes up short. We have met quota for 12 consecutive moons now. Excuse me, there ain't no traitors here, just hungry hands desperate for a day's wage." "Simpletons or not," Cadius retorted sharply as he closed the distance between them, his strides firm and purposeful, while his cloak continued to move of its own accord like a dark banner in the wind. Their ignorance could summon a Dragonox from Secundus, or worse, hand Clum's wealth to those shadow crawlers lurking across the rift. The temple binds those breaches with sacred rites, and the kingdom of Thoyatsu stands tall because we Antromancers hold the veil shut with our blood and will. Now they've undone my metasis, and risk letting Braden fall to their blundering or their thievery. I've seen the tallies myself, Veldrin, and vitrium has gone missing. Far more than any Nox could haul off in their greedy little jaws. Uh-oh, not sounding good for Veldrin. Nope, not at all. "But, my lord," Veldrin stammered, stepping back hastily until his heel caught on a loose stone embedded in the floor, a stumble that nearly toppled him into a stack of tax ledgers piled haphazardly by the door. The parchments, which were yellowed with age and nibbled at the edges by Nox, teetered precariously. Surely the Emperor's militia could— "Silence!" Cadius roared, and his voice erupted like a thunderclap that shook the home's sagging roof. Dust sifted down from the rafters like a gray shroud, settling over Veldrin's trembling form, and a faint clatter sounded as one of the ledgers slid free from the stack, flopping open to reveal a page gnawed through by tiny teeth. The Emperor sits on his Thanite hoard in that lavish palace of his, sipping fine wine from vitrium cups, while I guard this forsaken backwater mining village. The militia is no match for what's coming. They're nothing more than a pack of spear-waving clods in patched tunics who couldn't fend off a Nox swarm, traitorous invaders from Zarathan with blood dripping from their eyes, let alone a Dragonox. Move aside, for I've no time to waste on your prattle, you ink-stained wretch." So I did find a spelling, the incorrect word. It should say traitorous invaders, but it actually says traitors invaders. I'll have to let him know about that one. Actually, I'm going to share this video with him, so he'll see. It's only been 14 minutes. Holy cow, it feels like longer already. Veldrin yelped in a panic and moved aside. "I am sorry if I have offended you. Perhaps I can give you something to repay you. Yes, take my home, for it's the best in the village, a good measure more comfortable." As Cadius stormed past him, his boots ground ash into the floor with each determined step, and he brushed by the tax collector so swiftly that Veldrin flinched back against the wall. He ignored Veldrin's offer. Even Braden's grandest home remained a squalid pit compared to the temple's marble halls, adorned with Thanite chandeliers. Most of the floors here were a patchwork of clay and despair. where dark murals faded into oblivion under the relentless weight of damp and time. As he came to the street, the air thickened with sulphur's brimstone tang. It seeped through everything here like a miner's curse, stinging his nostrils and clinging to his throat with a bitter persistence. Veldrin closed the door behind him. The hinges shrieked a loud protest as the night's heavy stillness rushed in. Veldrin followed him into the sulphurous haze that blurred the edges of Braden's crooked lanes. Sorry about that. Enveloping them in a veil that seemed to swallow even the last vestiges of daylight. The street sprawled before him, a crooked ribbon of ash-dusted cobbles, flanked by squat homes, and their roofs sagged under layers of volcanic grime, resembling the slumped shoulders of weary miners resigned to their fate. Red carry root vines curled from cracked pots in desperate tendrils, and their crimson tubers shriveled beneath Clume's unrelenting sun, a testament to the scarcity that plagued the village. Only the mine offered any hope of abundance which the Emperor claimed. Lanterns swayed from rusted poles along the lane, casting a sickly yellow glow over the haze, and shadows twitched as villagers shuffled home from the day's toil. They were gaunt figures in tattered smocks, their faces pinched with hunger from weeks of meager rations, and their boots scuffed the gravel with a weary rhythm that echoed the distant clank of a miner's hammer reverberating from the ridge. A carriage waited across the vitrium-lined road. Its sleek, silvery stones glinted faintly beneath a fading sun that bled orange into the sulphurous sky overhead. Veins of Antron-rich ore pulsed subtly under the packed dirt, resembling the heartbeat of Clume itself, a fragile lifeline sustaining Braden's decay. "Stir yourself," Cadius barked, and he flicked his arm in a sharp summons that sent a gust rippling through his cloak. The motion scattered chaotic and choking ash in a swirling dance around his boots. Torv was the driver's name. The man was a stout, slump-shouldered man with a weathered face creased like old leather and gray-streaked, sandy hair spilling from a frayed cap that tilted askew. He stood beside the carriage and tightened its bindings to the thick brown hide of the hitched animal known as a girt. Cadius scowled at the rickety contraption. Its wooden planks seemed to sag under the tension of vitrium straps that shimmered faintly in the twilight's dying light, a subtle glow that caught the eye amidst the gloom. "Move along," Torv called out as he boarded the carriage, and his whip cracked through the air with a snap that echoed off the stone homes. The sharp sound, like a miner's pick striking a vitrium vein, had no effect on the girt. Torv's cap tilted further as he squinted against the wind that tugged at his fraying edges. The beast was a hulking mass, dwarfing a full-grown ox, and stood hairless and hump-backed before the carriage. Its gray-brown skin seemed to glisten with what little light there was, slick like oil. Its small, fierce eyes blinked nearsightedly beneath stubby horns that jutted like broken picks from its broad skull, an obstinate slab of muscle and bone that snorted a cloud of steam into the cooling air, carrying a sour whiff of carrot mash from its last meal. Its clawed feet shifted with maddening sloth, and its powerful, well-muscled legs flexed beneath its bulky frame, mocking their untapped speed as it pawed the ground and kicked up gravel that pinged off the carriage's frame with a faint metallic clatter. Okay. Let me gather the drills that I need for my next section here. One of these, some of these, some of these. Oh, yeah, and some of these. Oh, check mark. And percentage. Got those. Got those, got those. Oh, the little alien thingies. Alright, that looks like all per the specials. Okay. Well, Cadius barked as he strode impatiently forward, noticing that Torv hesitated with his whip poised midair, much like a fisherman might balk at a bad cast. His weathered hand trembled slightly under the weight of Cadius's piercing glare. "We've no time for your beast's laziness, man. The Oakwood's mind stirs, and Neptun's hum louder than a rift's wail. They're rattling my bones from leagues away. Lash it harder, or I'll weave you into the reins myself and see how you fare dragging this heap through the muck." Torv flinched, and his patched jerkin, reeking of girt sweat mixed with sour bile from too much drink, curled Cadius's nose. The driver recoiled in fear, his cap slipping further askew, hanging precariously on the edge of his head. "Aye, my lord, but she's weary, for these roads sap her spirit," he replied, and his voice carried a hint of a whine as he patted his belly with a rueful grin. A gap-toothed smile flashed beneath the cap's brim, and his orange-stained teeth testified to years of chewing cara root rind. Cara root's scarce this season, and the poor girl's half starved. I ain't much better myself. Been rationing my mash, too, and I reckon I'd haul faster on a full gut than she would right now. "Then rouse her," Cadius interrupted sharply. He yanked a long, scraggly shoot of cara root from his coat pocket, and its crimson flesh pulsed with antrons beneath a waxy skin that shimmered with a faint, otherworldly glow. A bitter, earthy scent wafted up, sharp like a miner's stale breath after a long shift, and it cut through the sulfur haze with a pungency that made Torv blink. "This'll stir her blood," Cadius said, "so make sure she eats all of it and let us be off." The Girt's nostrils flared wide. Its blunt snout snuffled the air with a wet snort that sprayed a fine mist, and saliva dripped in thick ropes from its maw as its interest in the tuber captured her attention above all else. The creature's small eyes gleamed with sudden hunger, and a low rumble vibrated its hump as it pawed the cobbles harder, impatient for its favorite meal and causing its claws to scrape with a faint screech that grated against the stillness. Yes, it is slower going between the two, between reading and diamond painting. Torv fed the shoot to the Girt carefully and muttered under his breath, "Bless the dome, you're a stern one. I hope she doesn't choke on it and leave me hauling you." He stepped forward and stroked its horned head, a slab of bone studded with knobs, like a miner's knuckles, as the beast chomped the tuber in 2 slobbering bites. Its jaws ground the cara root to mush with a sound like cracking stone. A wet smack echoed off the nearby homes, and its tongue slurped the last bits with a greedy flick that left a trail of drool glistening on its snout. There you go. Move now, you gritty lump, he called out cheerfully, and he gave the Gert's flank a playful slap that likely caused more pain to his hand than anything else. The beast snorted in indignation that there was no more food to be had. A blast of hot breath ruffled his frayed cap, and Torv grinned wider as he dodged a swipe of its muscular tail, which thumped the ground with a dull thud. To the mine, and do it swiftly, Cadius commanded. His voice cracked like a whip through the evening air, and he boarded the carriage with a heavy stride. His boots scuffed the warped wooden step, and a loose plank rattled against metal as he settled in onto the seat. Okay, there is one triangle, so I want to get that one triangle. There, and 2 check marks. Get the 2 check marks really quickly. 1 and 2. Aye, my lord, right away, Torv yelped in response. He snapped his reins with a flourish that sent them whistling through the air. The sharp snap jolted the Gert's head up with a snort. Hold fast! She'll be a runner now, he shouted as the beast sprang forward, antrons from the Kara root surging through the Gert's bloodstream and sinewy bulk like a spark of raw energy. The beast's massive weight seemed to vanish in a burst of speed that rattled the carriage's bolts and sent a jolt reverberating up Cadius's spine. The rickety frame of the bench shuddered violently as gravel sprayed beneath the Gert's claws. Small stones clattered against the wooden sides like a hail of curses, and Cadius was slammed backward into the seat. His cloak crushed behind him like a storm-tossed sail, and he nearly lost his footing on the uneven planks as Torv chuckled heartily. Faster than a Nox with a Vit, eh? I bet she'd race a Scarveth and trip over her own hooves, or mine if I tried keeping up. His cap flew off mid-laugh and tumbled into the air behind them, exposing the driver's sandy hair with a curse. The wind whipped wildly as they increased speed, and Torv whooped aloud as they shot down the streets and alleyways, making good time. A broad grin split his weathered face, and his toothed mirth shone as a fleeting light against the darkening haze they quickly left behind as they approached Braden's outskirts. On the very edge of the village, a shadowy figure darted from an alley nearby. It belonged to Rina, a wiry street rat and lookout barely past her teens. Her mousy hair swayed, tied back with a strip of girt hide that had darkened with age and grime. She wore a smock patched with miner's cloth, smudged with ash. Her filthy skirt, stitched together from scraps, was divided in a practical way, and a short blade of chipped vitrium dangled at her hip, its edge catching the lantern light with a dull gleam. Cadius sensed her immediately and signaled for the driver to stop, a feat easier said than done against the straining of the invigorated Gert. Eventually, the driver coaxed them to a stop, and Cadius leaned out of the carriage. Rina's sharp brown eyes flicked toward Cadius, and her freckled face flushed red from exertion as she ran ahead of the carriage. She skidded to a halt on the cobbles while panting heavily, her breath puffing white in the cooling air. "Master Cadius," she called out, her voice sharp and urgent despite the strain. "Trouble's brewing out there. The Nox are swarming out of the mines, and they're acting mad, clawing at folk like they've gone rabid. I saw 'em drag off a sack of vitrium from the smith's cart just now. It ain't natural behavior for those scavengers." Rinna, you whelp, Cadius barked with a measure of familiarity. Actually, I probably could have said that with a different tone of voice. Rinna, you whelp, Cadius barked with a measure of familiarity. His grey gaze narrowed as he exited the carriage, hefting his cloak over his shoulder. The vitrium thread woven into its hem glinted faintly in the lantern's glow. Nox thieving vitrium? That's no scavenger's work. It's Zarathan's hand stirring them, or some trader's coin coming from the shadows. Where did they haul it off to? They're heading toward the ridge, moving fast as Scarveths, Rinna panted, and her blade twitched in her grip as she pointed toward the dark silhouette of the Oakwoods mine against the horizon. I heard a hum, too, like lightning in the air, and thunder, deep and rumbling. The mines are groaning under some pressure. The miners have all fled. Something's riling 'em up. Bigger than Nox, I'd wager my blade on it. Then ride with us, Cadius snapped. He jerked his head toward the carriage, signaling her to join, and his tone brooked no argument. Torv, I expect no less speed despite the added weight. Rinna scrambled aboard with a quick leap. Her wiry frame ducked low as Torv coughed in surprise. Her blade clinked sharply against the railing as she wedged herself beside him on the driver's bench. Her eyes widened amid the swirling dust kicked up by the Gert's restless claws. With a flick of Torv's wrist, the carriage hurtled forward once more. Not swift enough, Cadius growled. He steadied himself against the jolting carriage, and his scarred hand gripped the seat's edge tightly, where wood splintered from years of use dug into his palm, leaving faint impressions in the calloused skin. The temple's will demands haste. Neptons rift the air and claw at my wards. Vitrium's being stolen. Traitors in Nial's ranks are feeding Zarathan's maw, and I'll not let anything hold me back, Torv. He closed his eyes against the bumping carriage and pressed a hand to his temple. The silver dome cooled his fevered skin, and its faint runes tingled under his touch with a whisper of the temple's power. With his other hand, he gripped the vitrium pole bolted to the carriage floor, and immediately its cold surface hummed with latent energy that pulsed against his palm. Sorry, I want to finish this color. Yeah, my next video I'm definitely gonna do differently. Ah, there you are, he murmured, his voice softening for a moment as he sensed a shimmer of Nepton particles at the veil's edge. The wild wisps buzzed like angry knocks in his mind, their chaotic pulse thrumming through his bones. He drew them through with a grunt that strained his frame. His chest heaved with the effort, and the power surged like a river breaking its banks. "Hold steady," Cadius called. "Let us see what speed we can reach." Antron's pull Clume tight and bind its seams with steady force, he thought, but Neptune's shove it up hard, wild and reckless as a raging river. "Watch this weave if you can, Torv. The temple's craft will lift us." He channeled the Neptons through the pole as a focused energy. It surged down through the pole into the metal underside of the carriage with a crackle that vibrated through both the air and his bones and snapped his teeth together. The vitrium hardened under the influx. It gleamed silver as it charged, repelling the buried ore beneath the road in a shimmer that rippled the air like heat rising from a forge. "Up!" "Up!" he roared, and the wheels lifted from the ground. The carriage began to float weightlessly above the cobbles. Its creaks fell silent as it hovered 2 fists above the surface. A faint hum rose from the charged metal and drowned out the Gert's huffing grunts, and the beast doubled its pace in response. Free from the weight of the carriage, its claws gouged the earth with a rhythmic thud, thud, thud that echoed through the haze, and it bellowed like a landslide's roar. Its hump swayed wildly as it tore through Braden's outskirts, kicking up dust that swirled around them like a storm's breath. "Mercy of the dome, we're aloft!" Torv cried out, his reins pulled taut in his weathered hands, and his voice trembled with a mix of awe and fear as the wind whipped through his sandy hair, now free of his lost cap. "She's flying like a scarabeth with a burr in its tail. I bet she'd outpace old Brull's drunk Gert and leave him kissing the dirt where he fell." Oh, I missed a couple of check marks. "You're a daft fool," Rinna laughed beside him. The wind whipped her mousy hair into a tangled mess, and her sharp gray eyes sparkled with mirth, despite the increasingly dangerous pace. "My da would start sober if he saw this contraption soaring." Villagers fled from their path, and they shouted in alarm. "It's Cadius! Clear the road!" They shot across the sea of red fields beyond the village's edge. Carrow-root tubers jutted from the parched soil as far as the eye could see, like bloodied fangs connected by long vines. The Oakwood's mine loomed ever closer. Its jagged entrance scarred the blackened ridge, where crumbling shale spilled down the slope, and twisted roots clawed at the sky. The mine reached for the fading light like the gnarled hands of miners long since fled. The distance between them and the mine shrank rapidly, devoured in mere heartbeats by the Gert's relentless charge. Excuse me. "Ease off now, my lord?" Torv asked, his voice worried as they approached the mine at a breakneck pace. His hands tightened on the reins as everything around him creaked under the strain. "Back to your pit, Neptons," Cadius commanded. He released the energy with a sharp flick of his will, and the energy snapped back like a taut bowstring loosed from its tension. The wheels of the carriage crunched down onto the gravel with a jolt, and the Gert slowed with a groan as its harness tugged taut. Its bellow faded into a huffing snort that puffed clouds of steam into the cooling air as they slowed and finally stopped. Rinna jumped swiftly to the ground. "I've never flew so swiftly in all my days," Torv gasped. He mopped sweat from his brow with a grimy sleeve, and his voice cracked into a shady croak that betrayed his rattled nerves. "I thought we'd sail clear to the temple of the dome and give them novices a fright. Maybe crash right through their fancy hall with a Gert's belch to announce us." That would be a funny sight to see. Yes, it would. It would be a funny sight to see. Cadius stepped down from the carriage. His boots ground into the stony paths strewn with shale chips, and the skeletal husks of dried carrow-root stalks littered all around. The sound echoed faintly in the stillness. The Oakwood's mine lay before him like a wound torn into the earth's flesh. Splintered timbers were scattered near the entrance, the wood streaked with dark ash, blending into the surrounding rock like a dark stain against the ridge's blackened face. The sun had fully set below the jagged peaks. Their craggy silhouettes swallowed its last rays of orange that bled into purple and faded into a bruised twilight. Shadows now pooled deep in the crevices around the entrance, The air was thickened with sulphur's pungent tang and the electric hum of neptons. A faint vibration prickled his skin like a miner's itch after a long, grueling shift, and the ominous atmosphere pressed against him as he stood before the mine. Took me a moment to realize exactly what color I'm doing. He tossed a handful of vits to Torv. The silver coins bore Emperor Nial's stern profile, their edges worn smooth from countless grubby hands. He barked his orders clearly. Return to Braden at once and summon the militia. Tell them to brace for an assault with blades sharpened and wits even sharper. Are you certain? Torv stammered. His jaw dropped as he fumbled to catch the coins. One slipped from his grasp, clinking onto the road with a dull ring, before rolling into a rut among the gravel. No attacks ever struck Braden. Not since old Brell fell off his girt drunk and called it a raid. Took 3 lads to peel him off the path. He swore it was a dragon ox, till he belched and passed out. Don't test me, Torv. Go now, Cadius roared. His grey gaze flared like a forge's heart, igniting with fury, and his scarred lip twisted into a snarl that bared teeth yellowed by years of hardship. The girt bellowed in warning as a low rumble shook loose pebbles from the path. The carriage lurched back toward town with a groan, and dust swirled around it as it vanished in the gloom. There, just adjusting these drills here. Cadius turned to face the mine's imposing metal doors. Vitrium slabs stood tall before him, etched with Antron runes that had dulled beneath layers of ash, and their surfaces bore pockmarks carved by time and the ridge's relentless wind. The edges showed chips where desperate miners had pried at them with crude tools, shaving off layers of the valuable metal. Valuable is spelled incorrectly. From within, Cadius was surprised to hear the faint clank of picks. A few brave miners must have kept to their duty after all. Oh, jeez. If you can hear that noise in the background, there's a shop across the highway, like across the road from my place, and it's like a small auto shop. Yeah, they like to rev the motors once in a while. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of putty that sticks to the drills. Like little tiny bits of putty that stick to the drills like this when they get dirty. This is the white putty that comes in these pens. Okay, perhaps the approaching festival of the first yield spurred on their efforts. If they met their quotas, it was one of the few days off where the ale flowed freely. A day of drunken revelry was something they all looked forward to, where they could dance around fires and consume copious amounts of swilled carroot brew until visions swam in the haze. Amidst the rhythm of their picks, claws skittered. A cacophony of knocks clawed at his nerves like a swarm breaching the dark recesses of the mine, and the sound sharpened beyond the usual chatter of knocks. Something larger and hungrier stirred in the depths, its presence a weight that pressed against his senses. "I'm too late," Cadius hissed under his breath as he strode forward, his cloak trailing ash in a gritty wake. The massive doors loomed before him like silent sentinels, guarding secrets buried deep within Clume's heart. I just had a drill on there. Where did it go? They stood barred with a heavy vitrium crossbeam, a slab thicker than a Gert's thigh, and its imposing weight testified to Braden's ingrained paranoia born of years under threat. The beam's surface bore claw marks that gleamed faintly in the torchlight's edge. Shallow scratches crisscrossed the metal like a map of past incursions. Oh, goodness. Rina came up behind him. "Why do we hold here?" she asked. "This is no mere Nox swarm," Cadius muttered. His scarred lip twitched as he turned his gaze back to the doors. The hum grew sharper in his ears, a vibration that buzzed through his boots and up his legs like a warning carved into his bones. "Stay back, girl, and fetch Torv if he dawdles with that militia. Keep any miners away. I'll not have their lives on my hands." He drew deep from his Antron well, a reservoir of pulling energy that pulsed within him, and called out with authority, "Rise!" The heavy beam surged upward as if lifted by the hands of 4 strong men. The air hummed with force as it rose, bent to his will. He cast the beam aside and flung the doors wide with a resounding clang that shuddered through the ridge. The sound reverberated into the dark like a beast stirring from slumber. Cadius grabbed an empty torch from the wall. Drawing again on his inner well of antrons, he willed it to light, and the torch burst into flame. The sound of a pick clanging against stone stopped. I'm just going to quickly check to see how much longer this chapter is, because I might have to do this in 2 videos. Okay, that's where I'm at. Okay, yeah, okay, I'm gonna stop there. Yeah, I'm gonna stop there because, and then I'm gonna do a second video with the second half of chapter 1. Yeah. So hopefully you enjoy it so far. I am like, yeah, I'm riveted. I want to see what happens next. Yes, I did scroll down on my phone, but I didn't, just to see how much more there is, and yeah, I don't know. It's more than it would take longer than 10 minutes to do. So I'm gonna do a second video, and I'll read the chapter first and then play it while I'm working. That way you can enjoy both at the same time, because That's pretty sad that I only got this much done in just under in 50 minutes. All right, so on that note, I'm gonna go, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.